The waiter handed Arthur my credit card back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I knew, deep in my 70-year-old bones, that something was wrong. Arthur hadn't so much as blinked when the bill for our dinner came to a cool $450. Most men I'd shared a meal with since my Harold passed would have at least flinched, maybe made a little joke about the price of the steak. But Arthur, he just signed his name with a flourish, as if he were signing a peace treaty. That's when the penny dropped, with a clang that echoed right through my soul. This whole romantic evening, the soft lights, the expensive wine he'd insisted on, might not have been as spontaneous as he'd made it seem. It felt rehearsed. But let me back up. Let me explain how a woman of my age, who should be content with bingo in her rose garden, ended up in the most expensive restaurant in San Francisco with a man who was either blessedly generous or playing a game I hadn't yet learned the rules to. 3 months earlier, I'd been standing in the pet food aisle of a fancy grocery store, trying to decide which overpriced, grain-free kibble my spoiled corgi, Winston, would deign to eat that week. My cart was loaded with the kind of single-serving meals that become your life after your husband of 45 years is no longer at the table. "I am so terribly sorry," a voice said, warm and laced with a faint accent I couldn't quite place. French, perhaps? I looked up from the dog food into the kindest pair of hazel eyes I'd seen since Harold's. They were set in the face of a man about my age, with a head of distinguished silver hair and a smile that made you forget you were wearing your comfortable, slightly faded slacks. "No harm done," I said, suddenly acutely aware that I was 70, wearing no makeup, and hadn't been on a proper date since the Johnson administration. "Arthur Pendleton," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, warm. "And I promise my cart handling skills are usually much more refined." "Beatrice Morgan," I replied. "Be to my friends. And if you're going to have a collision, the dog food aisle is a fairly safe bet. Less drama than the wine section." He threw his head back and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that made something in my chest flutter, something I'd thought had been permanently stilled after Harold's funeral. "Are you always this forgiving of clumsy strangers?" "Depends on the stranger," I heard myself say. The old bee, Harold's bee, would have offered a polite, tight-lipped smile and moved on. But something about Arthur made me want to linger. "Well, since I've already made a spectacle of myself," he said, his eyes twinkling, "would you allow me to make it up to you with a cup of coffee? There's a charming little place just next door." I should have said no. I should have finished my shopping, gone home to my quiet house in Winston, and watched my stories. Instead, a different woman spoke with my voice. "I'd like that very much." That coffee turned into dinner the following Friday. Dinner turned into strolls along the Marina Green. Strolls turned into visits to the De Young Museum and concerts at the Legion of Honor. For the first time since I'd scattered Harold's ashes into the Pacific, I felt the blood moving in my veins again. I felt alive. Arthur was everything Harold hadn't been. Impulsive where Harold had been deliberate. A world traveler where Harold had been a homebody. He spoke 3 languages, had lived on 3 continents, and ran a consulting business that allowed him a great deal of freedom. "I've been thinking of visiting my grandson in Provence," he mentioned one evening as we watched the fog roll over the Golden Gate Bridge. "Lucas is studying at a university in Aix. I haven't seen the boy in nearly a year." "That must be difficult," I said, thinking of my own grandson Michael, who lived in Denver and FaceTimed me every Sunday without fail. "It is," he said, stopping to face me. The wind ruffled his silver hair. "B, I know this might seem sudden, but would you consider coming with me? Lucas has been asking about you, and I think you'd adore the south of France in the autumn." My first instinct was a resounding no. We'd only been seeing each other for 3 months. Meeting his family felt like a monumental step. But then I remembered what my grief counselor had said about not letting the story of my life end with Harold's final chapter. "I'd have to check the expiration date on my passport," I said. "Is that a yes?" he asked, his face alight with hope. "That's a yes." The smile that spread across his face was brighter than the bridge lights reflected on the water. He pulled me into his arms right there on the path, with the salty air whipping around us, and he kissed me with a passion that belonged to people half our age. "You're going to love Lucas," he whispered against my cheek. "And he is going to adore you." That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, Arthur had taken charge of all the travel arrangements, insisting on paying for everything, first-class flights, a luxury hotel, despite my protests. "You are my guest, my Beatrice," he'd say, his tone brooking no argument. "Please let me take care of you." It was chivalrous. It was romantic. So why, sitting in this restaurant watching him hand back my credit card, did I feel a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach? Maybe it was the way he always changed the subject when I asked about the specifics of his consulting work. Or how his apartment, which I'd visited only a handful of times, felt more like a staged hotel suite than a home, with no personal mail, no family photos cluttering the surfaces. Or the fact that in 3 months I'd never met a single friend or colleague. "Nervous about the trip, my dear?" Arthur asked, misreading my pensive expression as the valet brought his car around. He drove a sleek new Mercedes. The import business must be very good indeed. "A little," I admitted. "It's been a long time since I went anywhere more exotic than Phoenix to see Michael. Lucas is so looking forward to meeting you," he said, his hand finding mine. It was warm, reassuring. "I think he's more nervous than you are, if I'm being honest. Meeting the woman who's brought such light back into his grandfather's life." The way he said it made my heart ache, and I felt a pang of guilt for my suspicions. This was Arthur, who brought me tulips every Tuesday because he knew they were my favorite, who remembered that I took my tea with honey and lemon. What was wrong with me that I was looking for darkness in this newfound light? As we drove back to my modest house in No Valley, Arthur chatted excitedly. "This time tomorrow we'll be in Aix-en-Provence. Are you ready for your French adventure, my Beatrice?" "Ready as I'll ever be," I said, squeezing his hand and pushing the doubts down until they were just a faint whisper. What could possibly go wrong? If I'd known then what I know now, I would have opened that car door at the next red light, gotten out and never looked back. I would have gone inside, bolted the door, and called Arthur Pendleton to tell him it was over. But I didn't know. Not yet. The flight to Marseille was seamless, which should have been my first clue that the universe was setting me up for a fall. Arthur was the perfect companion, holding my hand during takeoff, his calm presence a balm for my nerves. He patiently helped me with the customs forms, his fluency in French making everything seem effortless. "Worried about meeting Lucas?" he asked as we waited for our luggage. "Terrified," I confessed. "What if he thinks I'm a silly old woman?" "Impossible," he said, kissing my forehead. "He's going to see the remarkable woman I see." The Marseille airport was a bustling modern space. I tried to project an air of seasoned travel, but inside I felt exactly like what I was. A 70-year-old grandmother from San Francisco who was far out of her depth. "There he is," Arthur said, pointing towards the arrivals hall. Lucas Pendleton was not what I had expected. The pictures Arthur had shown me didn't do him justice. He was in his late 20s, tall and athletic with sun-streaked brown hair and a confident posture. He waved, a wide, welcoming smile on his face. "Grandpère." He embraced Arthur with genuine warmth before turning to me. "And you must be Beatrice. I have heard so much about you." His English was perfect, with only a trace of a French accent. To my astonishment, he leaned in and kissed me on both cheeks. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Lucas. Your grandfather talks about you constantly." "All exaggerations, I am sure," he said with a laugh that was a younger echo of Arthur's. "Come, the car is this way. You must be exhausted." The drive to Aix was like rolling through a postcard. Ancient plane trees lined the road, their leaves just beginning to turn. The light had a golden honeyed quality that made everything look soft and beautiful. Lucas kept up a steady stream of charming conversation, pointing out landmarks and asking about our flight. "Grandpère says you are a retired school teacher," he asked, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. "I was. For 40 years. 3rd grade. I retired about 5 years ago. After Harold died, the noise and energy of a classroom became too much. The silence of my own home was preferable to the sound of children who weren't my grandchildren. How wonderful to have the freedom to travel now," Lucas said. "Grandpère has been so excited to show you our France." Something in his tone, a faint note of amusement, made me study his reflection more closely. I told myself I was being a paranoid old woman. The apartment was in a stunning old building in the heart of Ike's, with tall, shuttered windows and worn, stone steps that spoke of centuries. Inside, it was beautifully furnished with antiques and original art. It was far grander than any student accommodation I could imagine. "This is breathtaking, Lucas," I said, running a hand over the smooth wood of a massive farmhouse table. "How does a university student afford a place like this?" Arthur and Lucas exchanged a glance so quick I almost missed it. "Grandpère helps," Lucas said smoothly. "And I have roommates to split the cost. They are away on a trip." Roommates. I saw no evidence of roommates. No extra toothbrushes in the spotless bathroom. No stray shoes by the door. "I thought we would have a quiet dinner in tonight," Arthur said, hanging our coats in a carved armoire. "Lucas has prepared his famous coq au vin. You cook?" I asked Lucas, trying to keep my tone light. "A man of many talents," he said with that same brilliant smile. "I hope you are hungry." Dinner was delicious, but I found myself watching them more than I was tasting the food. They had an easy, familiar banter, but there were moments, a shared look, a slight pause before one of them laughed, that felt exclusionary, as if I were an audience member at a play whose script I hadn't been given. Their conversation slipped fluidly between English and French. Arthur would translate for me, but I noticed he sometimes paraphrased, simplifying what Lucas had said. Once, after a rapid-fire exchange, Arthur said, "Lucas was just saying how much he's looking forward to taking us to the market in the village tomorrow. But I have enough high school French, reinforced by a lifetime of watching PBS, to have caught the words banque and demain, bank and tomorrow." I excused myself to use the salle de bain and took the opportunity to look around. The main bedroom was clearly occupied by a single man, Lucas's clothes, his cologne on the dresser. But in the living room on the mantelpiece were several framed photos. Arthur and Lucas at various ages in front of the Eiffel Tower on a ski slope on a yacht. And in several of them there was a woman with dark, elegant features, always positioned between them, her arm linked through Arthur's. When I returned, I decided to test the waters. "Lucas, your grandmother must be so proud of you, studying here in Provence." The cozy atmosphere in the room shattered. Lucas's wine glass froze halfway to his lips. Arthur's knife stilled on his plate. "My grandmother passed away when I was very small," Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral. "It has mostly been just me and grandpère." "I'm so sorry." Arthur never mentioned. I looked directly at Arthur, who was suddenly very interested in the pattern on his plate. "I saw some photos in the other room with a lovely woman who looked like family." "That was my step-grandmother Isabel," Lucas said, his tone flat. "She and grandpère divorced 2 years ago." 2 years. But Arthur had told me he'd been single for 5 years. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. After dinner, Arthur suggested an early night, pleading jet lag. But I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of a French night and the much louder sound of my own racing heart. Around 2 in the morning I heard hushed, urgent voices from the kitchen. Arthur and Lucas speaking in rapid French. I slipped out of bed and crept to the doorway, staying in the shadows. My French wasn't perfect, but it was better than they knew. I caught words and phrases that turned my blood to ice. "L'argent, money. La veuve américaine, the American widow. Cible parfaite, perfect target." And then Lucas said something that made my heart stop dead in my chest. "Elle parfaite, grandpère. Riquesse seule, et personne ici pour la protéger." She's perfect, grandfather. Wealthy, alone, and no one here to protect her. I backed away from the door, my legs trembling so violently I had to lean against the wall. This wasn't a romantic holiday. This was a hunt. And I was the prey. I didn't sleep a wink that night. My mind was a frantic reel, replaying every moment of the last 3 months. The lavish gifts, the insistence on handling all the plans, the probing questions about my finances, about Harold's life insurance policy, about my will. Questions I'd answered with a trusting heart because I thought I was building a new future. By the time the Provençal sun began to lighten the sky, I had made a decision. I wasn't a helpless victim. I was Beatrice Morgan, who had managed a classroom of 38-year-olds for 4 decades. I had survived the love of her life. I would not be taken down by a silver-haired fox and his conniving grandson. I had one advantage: they had no idea I understood more French than I let on. Bonjour, ma belle, Arthur said, kissing my cheek as I pretended to wake. Did you sleep well? Like a log, I lied, forcing a sweet, slightly drowsy smile. What's the plan for today? Lucas is taking us to the market in the village, and then to a wonderful little bistro for lunch. His eyes were bright with what I now recognized wasn't love, but avarice. At breakfast, I played my part to perfection, the delighted, slightly overwhelmed American tourist. I oohed and awed over the croissants, all while listening intently to every word between Arthur and Lucas. Il faut agir demain. We must act tomorrow. Patience. Elle est à nous. Patience, she is ours. They were discussing a timeline. My timeline. I thought we might do a little shopping today as well, Lucas said, switching to English when he saw me watching. There is a wonderful little street of antique dealers and jewelers. The family silver is so much better here than in America. Jewelers. Of course. A classic way to get a large, unauthorized purchase on a credit card, something that could be easily resold. That sounds lovely, I chirped. I do love to look, even if my teacher's pension doesn't allow for much more than looking. I watched Arthur's smile tighten at the edges. The idea that I might not be the cash cow they thought was clearly not part of their plan. The village market was a riot of color and scent, but I saw it now with different eyes. I saw how Lucas guided us away from the crowded main thoroughfares, how he and Arthur kept checking their phones. When we stopped for espresso, I excused myself to the toilets. Locked in a stall, I called my grandson Michael in Denver. The 7-hour time difference meant it was the middle of the night for him. Nana, he answered, his voice thick with sleep. Is everything okay? Aren't you in France? Michael, listen to me carefully and don't ask questions. I whispered, my voice low and urgent. I need you to call my bank. Put a freeze on all my credit cards. Tell them my cards have been compromised and to issue no new cards without a phone verification to you or your mother. Then call the bank and put a hold on any large withdrawals from my savings. Nana, you're scaring me. What's going on? Is Arthur there? I'm fine for now, but I think Arthur and his grandson are not who they seem. If you can't reach me for 24 hours, I need you to call the American Embassy in Marseille. Just a touch of traveler's tummy. His smile in the mirror was sympathetic, but his eyes were hard. Grandpere was getting worried. Everything all right at home? Oh yes. Just the usual. Michael is always worrying about my finances. Thinks I'm too trusting. I watched his reaction like a hawk. A smart grandson, Lucas said smoothly. The world is full of people who would take advantage of a generous heart. The irony was so profound I nearly laughed out loud. The afternoon's shopping trip confirmed my worst fears. Lucas led us to a small, exclusive-looking jewelry boutique where the owner, a severe-looking woman named Chantal, greeted him like a nephew. Voici mon grand-père de ses petites amies américaines, Lucas said in French. Celle dont je parle. This is my grandfather and his American girlfriend, the one I told you about. Chantal's eyes lit up with understanding. She immediately began showing me estate pieces, heavy gold and glittering gemstones. This necklace, she said, holding up a stunning sapphire and diamond piece, would be an excellent investment. Much better than money in the bank. The price tag dangling from it read 18,000 euros. Arthur put his arm around me. You should have it, Beatrice. It's as beautiful as you are. Arthur, I couldn't possibly. Please let me do this for you. The pressure was a tangible thing, a vice closing around me. Lucas chimed in. Chantal offers excellent financing terms. All three of them were in on it. They were trying to get me to make a massive purchase to bleed my accounts dry. It's exquisite, I said, letting my voice waver with feigned temptation. But I have a rule. I never make a purchase like this without sleeping on it. Harold and I always said, if in doubt, sleep on it. I saw the flash of impatience in Lucas's eyes before he masked it. Of course, Arthur said a bit too quickly. We can come back tomorrow. But the look he exchanged with Chantal was one of pure frustration. Tomorrow was not soon enough. That evening at dinner I made my move. When Lucas went to the kitchen to fetch another bottle of wine, I leaned across the table and took Arthur's hand, letting my eyes well up with manufactured tears. "Arthur, there's something I need to tell you," I whispered. "I haven't been entirely honest with you." He went perfectly still, his entire focus on me. "What is it, my dear?" "About my finances. I've been so embarrassed letting you pay for everything when the truth is, I can afford to contribute a great deal more." His grip on my hand tightened. "Beatrice, that isn't necessary. Harold's life insurance was substantial," I said, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Over $3 million, plus his pension and our investments. I've been so careful with it, so afraid. But being with you, I think I'm ready to start living again." "With you?" The transformation on Arthur's face was chilling. The gentle, loving mask slipped, and for a single unguarded moment, I saw the raw, calculating greed beneath. "That's wonderful, my darling," he breathed. "You deserve every happiness." When Lucas returned, Arthur leaned over and muttered something in rapid French. I caught trois millions and saw Lucas's eyes widen, a predator's gleam. They thought they'd hit the jackpot. What they didn't know was that they just confessed their intentions to a woman who understood them, and that this particular old granny was not going down without a fight. I spent my second sleepless night in France not in fear, but in strategic planning. Running was the obvious choice, but it felt like letting them win. I wanted answers. I wanted to know how many other women like me there had been. Over breakfast, Lucas was buzzing with a new plan. I thought today we would take a drive into the Luberon, to see one of the most beautiful villages in France. Gourds. The views are incredible. A drive into the mountains. Away from the town, away from witnesses. I knew what that meant. "That sounds wonderful," I said, spreading cherry jam on my toast. "Though I must admit, all this rich food is disagreeing with me. I should find a pharmacy." "Nonsense," Lucas said, already pulling out his phone. "I have something that will help. A French remedy. Much better than what you have in America." He shook 2 small white pills into his hand. "Take these with your water. You will feel better in no time." I looked at the unmarked pills. Every instinct screamed no. "You are so kind, Lucas, but I'm allergic to most medications. I'll just pick up something I know at the pharmacy." His smile was tight. "Are you sure? These are very gentle." "I'm sure." I pretended to take the pills, palming them and slipping them into my pocket. Evidence. The drive into the Luberon was breathtaking. All rolling hills and perched villages of pale stone. But the beauty was lost on me. I was watching the road, noting how Lucas took turns that didn't align with the signs for gourds. My phone signal dwindled to nothing. "Pull over here," Arthur commanded as we came to a deserted scenic overlook. The view was of a vast, rugged valley, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet just beyond the flimsy-looking guardrail. "Beatrice, you have to see this." The overlook was utterly deserted. A perfect place for a tragic accident. "It's magnificent," I said, staying firmly by the car door while they walked to the edge. They stood there looking down and I heard Lucas say, "Naturel, come on accident." Natural, like an accident. That was the final confirmation. This wasn't just about money. It was about my life. My hands were steady as I quietly opened the car door. Lucas had left his leather satchel on the driver's seat. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I opened it. Inside I found his passport. Lucas Roche, French citizen. But his date of birth made him 32, not 26. And the passport was filled with stamps from Thailand, Argentina, South Africa. All places with wealthy retirees. I quickly took pictures with my phone. Beneath the passport was a small cold shock. A vial of clear liquid and a sealed syringe. Pocketed them both. "Beatrice, come join us," Arthur called. "I'm a little dizzy," I called back, clutching the car door for effect. "And I'm truly terrified of heights. Perhaps we should just go on to gourds." They exchanged a look of pure frustration. My refusal to stand at the precipice had ruined their plan A. The rest of the day was a tense pantomime. In gourds swarming with tourists, I felt a measure of safety. During the castle tour, I managed to send a coded text to Michael. "The views here are to die for, taking so many pictures of everything." Can't wait to show you all the details when I'm home. Love you, Nana. I hoped he'd understand the message hidden in the melodrama. As we left, Lucas steered us toward a small, shadowy antique shop down a quiet alley. They have the most beautiful things here, he said. Things you won't find anywhere else. The shop was dark and dusty, the elderly proprietor dozing behind the counter. Lucas led me to a display of heavy silver picture frames at the back, away from the door. Arthur positioned himself near the entrance, blocking it. This was it. This one would be perfect for a photo of your Harold, Lucas said, his voice low. He picked up a heavy, sharp-cornered frame. But he wasn't looking at the frame. He was looking at me, his eyes calculating the angle. I looked him dead in the eye and said in clear if accented French, "Non merci, Lucas. Je pense que j'ai vu assez." No thank you, Lucas. I think I've seen enough. The color drained from his face. You speak French? Enough, I said, my voice steady as I turned to face Arthur, whose expression had turned to stone. Enough to know you've been planning to rob me. Or worse. The shop owner stirred, blinking owlishly. No help would come from there. Arthur moved toward me, his hand slipping into his jacket pocket. Beatrice, I think you're confused. Am I? I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app, hitting play. It was recording. Why don't you explain it to me? Tell me about the perfect target. The American widow with no one to protect her. Arthur lunged for the phone, but 70 years of life had taught me a thing or two about being quick. I swung my heavy purse, connecting solidly with the side of his head. He cried out and stumbled back into a rack of old maps. Lucas reached for me, but I was ready. I drove the pointed toe of my sensible walking shoe hard into his shin. He howled in pain and surprise. Oh, secours! Help! I screamed, running for the door. Ils violent me tuer. They want to kill me. I burst out into the alley, still shouting. A group of German tourists turned to stare. I saw a police officer, a gendarme, near the town square and ran toward him. Parlez-vous anglais? I gasped. A little, he said, his brow furrowed in concern. What is the problem? I pointed back at the shop where Arthur and Lucas were emerging, Arthur rubbing his head, Lucas limping. Those men. They brought me here to rob me. They were going to kill me. The officer looked skeptical. The story of a frantic old woman versus two calm, well-dressed men. Officer, Arthur said, his voice a masterpiece of concerned reason. I am so sorry. My fiancée, she has not been herself since we arrived. The travel, the medication, she becomes confused. Paranoid. Fiancé? The audacity. He's lying. I said, my voice firm. My name is Beatrice Morgan. I am an American citizen. Check their passports. He told me his grandson was 26, but his passport says he's 32. The officer looked between us, uncertain. The story of a family dispute was easier to believe than an international murder plot. I need to call the American embassy, I declared. Of course, the officer said, but perhaps it is better to resolve this quietly. Return to your hotel, rest. Arthur nodded eagerly. Yes, exactly. Thank you, officer. But as we walked back to the car, the victory in their eyes was unmistakable. I had shown my hand, but I was still in their custody. Now they knew I was a threat, and they would be desperate to silence me. Get in the car, Beatrice, Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. His hand was back in his pocket. I was sure he had a weapon. The drive back to Ike's was a silent, terrifying countdown. They couldn't kill me in Gourds, but on a dark, remote road. That was a different story. I had evidence, I had my wits, and I had the fury of a grandmother who had seen through their wicked game. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman. They were about to learn they had tangled with an avenging granny. Note: the story can continue from here, detailing Beatrice's escape, the involvement of the authorities, and the unraveling of Arthur and Lucas's criminal network, all from her sharp-witted, 70-year-old perspective. The car was a tomb on wheels. Arthur sat rigid in the passenger seat, his earlier charm replaced by a cold, metallic silence. Lucas drove with a grim focus, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The plan had changed. The clean, accidental push from a cliff was now off the table. They needed something messier, more definitive. I sat in the back, my mind racing faster than the Mercedes engine. My phone was gone, confiscated by a tight-lipped Lucas. My evidence, the pills, the vial, was tucked into my brassiere. A desperate old lady hiding place that seemed both ridiculous and my only option. I watched the sun dip below the hills, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. The beauty was a mockery. "We're not going back to Ike's," Lucas stated, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. They were flat, devoid of the charming twinkle from just days before. "Where then?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "A place we use for storage," Arthur said, not turning around. "A bit more private. We need to have a serious discussion about your financial assets, Beatrice. Without any interruptions. A storage place. A place where screams wouldn't be heard." I looked out the window, memorizing the route. We turned off the main highway, then onto a smaller departmental road, then onto a dirt track that wound through a scrubby forest of pine and oak. It was the kind of place you'd dump a body. After 10 bumpy minutes, a low concrete structure emerged from the trees. It looked like a relic from the war, a bunker with a heavy rusted metal door. My blood ran cold. This was more than a storage unit. This was a grave. Lucas killed the engine. The silence of the forest was absolute and oppressive. "Out!" Arthur commanded. With my hands free but my spirit fettered, I climbed out. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine. Lucas produced a key and unlocked a massive padlock on the door. With a groan of protesting metal, he pulled it open, revealing a yawning blackness. "After you," Arthur said, gesturing with the gun he now held openly. I walked into the darkness. The air inside was stale and cold. Lucas flicked a switch, and a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling illuminated a grim scene. The bunker was about 20 feet square, with concrete walls and a dirt floor. There were a few crates stacked against one wall, a rickety table and 2 chairs. In the corner I saw a shovel and a pile of quicklime. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was where they ended it. "Sit," Arthur said, pointing to one of the chairs. I sat. My knees were trembling, but I refused to let them see it. I was Beatrice Morgan, and I would not give them the satisfaction of my fear. Arthur placed the tablet computer on the table. "Now let's try this again. Bank of America. Username and password." I looked from his greedy face to Lucas's impatient one. I thought of Harold, of Michael, of my quiet life with Winston. A fierce protective rage boiled up inside me. "No," I said. Arthur's face darkened. "Beatrice, we are past playing games. You will give us the information, or this will become very unpleasant." "You're going to kill me either way," I said, the truth of it settling over me like a shroud. "You've done it before. The other women. The ones in your little database." That caught them off guard. Lucas took a step back. "What database?" "The one on your computer. The one the police are probably looking at right now, thanks to my grandson." It was a bluff, a desperate one, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in Arthur's eyes. "You're lying," he spat. "Am I? Michael is a software engineer. While you were busy playing the charming suitor, he was setting up remote access to my devices. He has everything. Every photo, every recording from my phone. He knows I'm with you. And if I don't call him by a specific time tonight, that data gets sent to the FBI, Interpol, and the Gendarmerie Nationale." It was a glorious, magnificent lie, woven from shreds of truth and a grandmother's cunning. I poured every ounce of my will into selling it, my gaze unwavering. Arthur and Lucas exchanged a long, silent look. The dynamic had shifted. I was no longer just a mark. I was a liability that could unravel their entire operation. "We can't let her go," Lucas said quietly in French. "We won't," Arthur replied in the same language. "But we need to verify this. We need to access her accounts now, drain them, and disappear before any of this supposed data gets out." He turned back to me, his expression a mask of cold fury. "The information, Beatrice. Now, or I will have Lucas start breaking your fingers one by one. You may be ready to die, but are you ready for pain?" Lucas picked up a heavy metal pipe from one of the crates, slapping it against his palm. The threat was visceral, horrifying. My bravado faltered. I was tough, but I wasn't invincible. I was a 70-year-old woman facing two ruthless killers. I had to think. I had to stall. "All right," I whispered, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. "All right. I'll give you what you want. But I need my phone. The passwords are in a secure note app. I can't remember them all." Another lie. But a plausible one. Arthur studied me, his eyes narrowed. He nodded to Lucas. "Get her phone." But no tricks. Lucas retrieved my phone from the glove compartment and handed it to me, his grip like a vice on my wrist. I turned it on, my mind racing. The screen lit up. No signal, of course. But I had one last desperate play. I opened the Notes app, my fingers trembling slightly. I typed a single all-caps message, knowing they were watching my every move. Michael Arthur Pendleton Lucas Roche. Bunker in Woods off D904. They have a gun. Send police. I didn't hit a send button. There was no one to send it to. But I made a show of typing, of accessing a secure app. Then I deliberately entered the wrong password for my banking app 3 times, just as I had planned. "Access denied," the app chirped. "Account locked for 24 hours due to suspicious activity." I let the phone clatter to the table. "There. You've locked it. It's useless now. The bank's security protocol." Arthur's face contorted in rage. He snatched the phone and saw the lock screen. With a roar of frustration, he hurled it against the concrete wall. It shattered into a dozen pieces. "You stupid, stubborn old woman," he screamed. It was then that we all heard it. A sound so faint, so out of place in this grim setting that it took a moment to register. A dog barking in the distance. Lucas's head snapped up. "What was that?" "Probably a fox," Arthur muttered, but a new tension had entered his posture. The barking came again, closer this time. And then another sound. The crunch of tires on the gravel road. My heart leaped into my throat. My message. Had it? No, that was impossible. There was no signal. It was just a note on a broken phone. But the sounds were real. Lucas ran to the bunker door and peered out into the growing darkness. "Murd," he hissed. "Headlights." Arthur's composure finally broke. Panic flashed in his eyes. "The quicklime. The shovel. We need to." He never finished the sentence. A voice amplified by a megaphone echoed through the forest, first in French, then in English. "Arthur Pendleton. Lucas Roche. This is the police. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." The cavalry had arrived. Not because of my clever note, but because my darling, worried grandson Michael had kept his promise. He had called the embassy, and the embassy had called the police. The nightmare was over. Arthur dropped his gun as if it had burned him. Lucas raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of stunned defeat. I didn't move from my chair. I simply looked at the two of them, the men who had promised me a new life and instead had led me to a concrete tomb. A team of tactical officers swarmed into the bunker, weapons drawn. As they roughly handcuffed Arthur and Lucas, a detective in a plain suit walked over to me. He had a kind, weary face. "Madam Morgan?" he said in heavily accented English. "I am Detective Inspector Moreau. Are you injured?" I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first clean breath I felt I'd taken in days. I smoothed down my wrinkled blouse and looked him in the eye. "No, Inspector," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I am quite all right. But I believe I have some information you might find very, very interesting." The police station in Aix-en-Provence was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. I was wrapped in a scratchy thermal blanket and given a cup of sweet, strong tea that did little to warm the cold that had settled in my bones. Detective Inspector Moreau sat across from me in a small, brightly lit interview room, a female officer beside him to act as a translator when my French failed me. "Your grandson, Michael, he is very persistent," Moreau began, a hint of a smile on his lips. "He called the embassy every hour. He provided all your details, your travel itinerary, the names. When you missed your check-in time, the embassy contacted us immediately. We pinged the last location of your phone, which was near Gourds. A witness reported a distressed elderly woman matching your description, and we tracked the car from there. So it wasn't my cleverness that saved me. It was love. It was Michael's stubborn, unwavering worry. The realization brought tears to my eyes that I quickly blinked away. Now, madam, Moreau said, his tone gentle but firm. You said you have information? I told him everything. I started from the beginning, from the accidental meeting in the grocery store to the inconsistencies, the French conversations I'd understood, the pills, the vial and syringe from Lucas's bag, the mine shaft, the jewelry store, and finally the bunker. I handed over the physical evidence from my bra. The female officer bagged it with a look of profound respect. When I mentioned the database, and the other women, Moreau's demeanor shifted from concern to intensely focused. This database, you saw it on a computer? On a tablet. Arthur had it in the bunker. He was trying to force me to log into my accounts. Moreau excused himself and returned 20 minutes later with a look of grim satisfaction. We found the tablet in their car. Our cyber unit is bypassing the password now. Madam Morgan, do you have any idea of the scale of what you have uncovered? I shook my head, a dreadful curiosity warring with my exhaustion. This is not two criminals. This is a cell of a much larger network. An international syndicate that targets wealthy, vulnerable seniors. What they called the Sunset Hunt. The Sunset Hunt, I repeated, the name dripping with a vile poetry. It made me sick. Arthur Pendleton is really Alain Perrault. Lucas Roche is his actual grandson. They have been working together for a decade. The divorced stepmother in the photos was another accomplice, currently in custody in Italy. You were to be their 9th retirement. 9. 8 other women with families and stories and lives, erased for their money. The room seemed to spin. I need to call my grandson, I whispered. Of course. They brought me a phone. Michael's voice on the line was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Nana! Oh my God, Nana! He was sobbing with relief. I'm safe, my darling boy, I said, my own tears finally flowing freely. I'm safe. You saved me. The following days were a blur of official statements, embassy liaisons, and psychological evaluations. The American FBI sent an agent, a serious young woman named Agent Miller, who debriefed me for hours. The data on the tablet had been a treasure trove for law enforcement. Names, photos, financial records, and communication logs linking Perrault and Roche to a sophisticated network spanning 12 countries. I learned that my teacher's pension ruse had, in fact, made me a less appealing target for a short while, but my subsequent lie about the $3 million had sealed my fate. Greed had overridden their caution. I was put up in a quiet hotel near the police station, under a kind of protective watch. The press had gotten wind of the granny who foiled international killers, but the police kept them at bay. I didn't want fame. I wanted to go home. A week after the bunker, Detective Moreau visited me at the hotel. He looked tired but pleased. The extradition paperwork is being fast-tracked, Madam Morgan. You will be able to return to San Francisco soon. But first, there is someone who would like to speak with you. She insisted. He stepped aside, and a woman walked into the room. She was in her late 60s with kind, tired eyes and a gentle smile. She looked familiar. Beatrice, she said, her voice soft. My name is Eleanor Shaw. I was supposed to be number 7. My hand flew to my mouth. One of the others. A survivor. We sat for 2 hours drinking tea and sharing a story we never should have had in common. Eleanor was a widow from Bath, England. Her Arthur had been a man named Charles with a niece named Sophie. Their method was identical. They had charmed her, isolated her, and taken her on a holiday to a villa in Tuscany. She had only escaped because a suspicious hotel clerk had contacted her son after noticing bruises on her arm. After the police arrested Charles, they found records, Eleanor said, her hand trembling as she lifted her cup. But they never found the others. Not until you. You gave them the key, Beatrice. You gave us all answers. She handed me a photograph. It was of a smiling woman with vibrant red hair. Catherine O'Donnell. Number 4. Her family has been searching for 3 years. They can finally lay her to rest. I looked at Catherine's smiling face, and the full horrifying weight of what Arthur and Lucas had done finally crashed down on me. It wasn't just about me. It was about Catherine and Eleanor, and the 6 other women whose names I now carried with me.